Just want to say a few words on the whip being taken away from the Tory MP and former Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party, Lee Anderson, over comments he made about Sadiq Khan and Keir Starmer regarding Islamists. He was speaking, I understand, on GB News, and he said he didn't think Islamists had control of Britain, but he felt basically that they had control of Khan and Starmer. Now that's quite a claim to make against rival politicians, but basically, he's had the whip suspended. He's been accused of Islamophobia. Sadiq Khan has said it's a sort of language that encourages anti-Muslim attacks. Baroness Farzi has condemned it. But it's divided the Conservative Party and inevitably will divide opinion as well. My take on this is, assuming he hasn't said anything else that is anti-Muslim, which is very different from being anti-Islamist, then I'm tempted to say this is an attack on freedom of expression. Now, I want to be clear, when you make a claim about a rival politician, and that may or may not be accurate, many people would say he was speaking the truth, but it is a loaded claim to basically say the Mayor of London is in bed with extremists. Then, you need to be able to back it up. Now, I think there's a debate around that. I do think on Sadiq Khan's watch, extremists have been enabled. And if we look at the pro-Palestinian rallies, there are a lot of people in those who have legitimate concerns about what's happening in Gaza. But I think unquestionably there are Islamists among them and Hamas sympathizers, unquestionably. But it isn't just Sadiq Khan. I think the Metropolitan Police have a lot to answer for because they've been inconsistent. Whenever they've seen the hint of a British or English flag, they have swooped in and made arrests over alleged far-right activism. But when Islamists have openly called for jihad, the Metropolitan Police's response was, "We'll look into the matter." There is a glaring lack of consistency. When Jewish Londoners put up posters talking about the hostages in Gaza, they were advised to bring them down, ostensibly for their own safety. But this gets into an issue about certainly policing in Sadiq Khan's London, where the priorities of the Met is, and extremists being enabled. Now, I suspect that Lee Anderson himself hasn't condemned the suspension. He accepts that it put the Prime Minister in a difficult position, because there's politics played out here. No doubt there'll be people on the left who know that Labour has been attacked for anti-Semitism, so they'll be itching for an opportunity to criticise the Tories for alleged Islamophobia. I've said before I have a big problem with this term because I think it's weaponised to try and censor and silence legitimate criticism of Islamist ideology. Now, if Anderson, or any other Tory MP for that matter, was to make anti-Muslim comments, that's clearly not good for an elected politician when Muslims form a sizable minority of British citizens and Londoners. I wouldn't support that. But what concerns me about the suspension is Anderson seems to be punished for talking about Islamism. Now, that's really concerning. He has made loaded claims against two rival politicians, Sadiq Khan and Keir Starmer. The reality is, in a lot of Labour councils, Islamist ideology has been allowed to take some hold. I don't want to exaggerate it, but I can think of the Batley situation where a Quran was allegedly desecrated and Labour councillors were demanding police involvement, and they were demanding to treat it like a major crime, when it turned out what had actually happened was it had some minor scruffing, and it wasn't a sort of deliberate act of desecration. It was just a misunderstanding between some schoolboys. Things like that, often get swept under the media attention, but I do think we need to be very wary now. We're almost certainly heading for a Labour government. This is one of the big concerns I have about Labour, that they are too tolerant of Islamist ideology. Now, of course, if there's a terrorist attack, any mainstream politician will condemn that. Sadiq Khan and Keir Starmer will, pay tributes to the victims. They'll light candles. They'll condemn terrorism. But what I want to see from left-wing politicians is an explicit and clear recognition of Islamist ideology, not a generic condemnation of terrorism, Corbyn style, but a specific recognition that this is a real ideology. It is out there, and it's a threat to our society and way of life. I'm not saying that I agree with Lee Anderson, because to say that Khan's in bed with Islamists, that's quite a specific claim. Um, and he's an elected politician. He needs to be careful about that. But the point I would make is if Sadiq Khan really feels he's been maligned unfairly, he'd be within his rights to press, a slander case, sue Mr. Anderson for slander. And if that's accurate, then he'll win the case. But if there's any truth in what Lee Anderson says, then he'll win the case. So what's Khan scared of in that sense? Why isn't he suing Lee Anderson? That to me would almost be a better approach than him losing his job in the Tory party. I'm not sure about this one. Now there may be more to it. Maybe Lee Anderson has said other things that are wholly inappropriate. But if he is being punished simply for saying that there are senior politicians on the left who've pandered to Islamists, it's it's a contentious claim, but does that warrant being sacked over? And is that Islamophobic? That's the bit I find really alarming, that the charge of Islamism is being conflated with Islamophobia. I mean, does Sadiq Khan really think the likes of Hizb ut-Tahrir and other extremist groups shouldn't be criticised? This is the problem with the mindset of the left. They hear criticism of Islamic extremism and they automatically think racism, Islamophobia. That has to be seriously challenged. And as others have pointed out, Islam is a religion, not a race. So even if he was criticising Islam, the religion, it's still not racism. Might be bigoted if he was attacking all Muslims, but I don't think he was doing that. Like I said, there may be more to this, but I find it quite concerning. And bearing in mind, in Scotland, the First Minister there has been accused in the past of trying to introduce de facto blasphemy laws by stealth, ironically under updating old blasphemy laws that are archaic and never used in Scotland. Um, but we need to be very, very careful in this country that religion isn't placed above criticism. And I think we could have a situation where, because Islam is perceived to be a minority religion, then it will get special status. There has to be freedom to criticize any religion. I think Christianity gets slack all the time. It's all constantly ridiculed, constantly attacked. You get someone like Sam Smith openly mocking it, and that's art. But when it comes to Islam, that would lead to death threats. And I do think there is too many people in power who pander to this now. Baroness Farsi, she's a Tory, but her attitude to um, the Islamist Abu Hamza was he's a nutter. I remember seeing that on Question Time. Her attitude was he's a nutter. He's nothing to do with Islam. So she's a typical denialist. You know, Islamic extremism has nothing to do with Islam. That is denialism. It's unhelpful. It's dishonest. Islamic extremism is part of Islam whether Muslims admit it or not. It may not be in their interpretation of Islam. They may say it's distorted. They may say it's nothing to do with the true faith. But that's just the problem. Who gets to decide what is the true faith? I don't think we defeat Islamism by pretending it doesn't exist. There's very serious free speech issues involved here. And again, Lee Anderson was talking about Islamism. He was not talking about Muslims. This is a very, very important thing to differentiate. If he was talking about Muslims, I'd have little sympathy. I'd say you're an elected politician, that's undiplomatic, but he wasn't. So my instinct is to say, no, this is wrong. And of course, Rishi Sunak suspended the whip from him because he has to be seen to be tackling Islamophobia. But no doubt many Tories will say this is giving in to a regressive way of thinking, which is to censor different points of view. If Sadiq Khan thinks the claims are wrong, then let him sue Mr. Anderson. It could be a personal dispute between them. But to make this absurd claim that Khan has made, that it's Islamophobia, that is playing with words and he knows it. It was a critique of Islamism, not Islam, and not Muslims. Although I think legitimate criticism of Islam is okay as a faith. Criticism of Muslims, it depends on the context. If it's like vilifying all Muslims, that's bigotry, and I wouldn't support it. But what I find alarming is the way the left conflate the two. It's actually quite dangerous. Let me know your thoughts.